Good afternoon. My name is Wally Swanson, and I'm a teacher and I'm a coach. I work at a school about 10 miles down the road, Wilbraham and Monson Academy. And our student body is comprised of students from over 30 countries. That level of diversity has its own history, has a series of challenges, and has opportunities for success. Yet what it also has done for us as an institution, it has pushed us to constantly reteach, relearn, and redefine our rules. I began a career in international education in the Peace Corps. I graduated from college with virtually no tangible skills whatsoever, other than the ability to read and write English, and I could weld metal. And I could weld metal because my father had a small tent and awning business where I grew up, and he took full advantage of there being no rules associated with child labor in a family-run business. Hence, I had a couple of skills. So the U.S. Peace Corps gave me a choice. They said, Mr. Swanson, would you like to teach off the coast of West Africa in a former Portuguese colony called Cape Verde? Or would you like to weld metal in north central African country of Chad, which sounded like literally the hottest job in the world? So I became an educator. And I think back now of how I fumbled through learning the rules of a different culture. I remember the first week I was there in very limited Cape Verdean Creole, adamant that I was going to go fetch my own water, and then immediately realizing that I had broke some significant gender rules in the community. I remember really wanting to get involved in conversations with other people my own age and faking interest in Portuguese soccer. I also remember suffering and smiling through foods I viewed as very exotic and ethnic, with no thought in my mind that every food I had ever touched had an ethnicity connected with it. But all this was a journey. And then I spent a number of years working through State Department-funded initiatives with NGOs, predominantly in Uzbekistan, Nepal, and Cambodia, and became fairly adept at being able to navigate the rules of different places. And finally, I felt that I wanted to go back to a place where I was infinitely familiar with the rules. I went back to prep school, being a product of prep school myself. And I ended up at the academy down the road. Now, the academy, as diverse as it is now with over 30 countries represented, didn't start that way. Actually, in the 1840s, 4 students from China, in the southwestern corner of China, came over to a small town called Monson, Massachusetts. These were the first Chinese students ever to study in this country. Of those 4, only 1 graduated from the academy. His name was Young Wing. After graduating from the academy, he eventually went on to Yale University, becoming Yale's first Chinese graduate as well. Now, I know this bears repeating that 1840s was hardly a time of immense tolerance in this country. It was not a time when we had TED conversations about innovation and diversity. This is also about 100 years before the Chinese Communist Revolution, decades before the Chinese Exclusion Act, and a little bit before our Civil War. So you can imagine, or we probably can't imagine, the struggles this young man had to face. Yet, I see hints of this struggle, hints of students trying to learn these new games at my own school. Now, everybody looks happy here. But there is an incredible amount of struggle in high school when you learn the culture of high school. I see our own international students coming from all over the world, and I see them engage, and I see them try to learn these new rules. I see students so eager to talk to other people that they're asking the score of their last night's Red Sox game in February. I see them so excited to hold on to this big, gluttonous American cheeseburger and cover it with ketchup, and then also their accompanying side salad with ketchup. And then I see our student from overseas who's going to meet the mother of his American roommate for the first time and leads in with a very sincere fist bump. and all of those are very sincere attempts to learn about other people. But they're also breaking other rules. And all these rules, these are the ones that aren't written, but they're often the most important. Now, think about your own high school and your own culture. All of us have a culture. It's very easy to identify culture as, well, that's something the other group has. But when I think back to my own culture, white suburban Boston prep school, there were sort of 3 things that you needed to do to be able to be part of that group. You needed to be able to have or fake a sincere interest in sports. You needed to be able to have on instant recall a series of movies that you could make reference to. Among those included Slapshot, Caddyshack, Breakfast Club, a host of movies. And then also, the key piece of culture where I grew up was you needed to know that insults were a sign of affection. And then if you didn't know those rules, you weren't allowed into the culture that I grew up in. Now, rules are not written down today. One of the negative effects of political correctness is that we came up with a series of rules and then we buried them far into the reaches of the back of the Human Resources Manual. Now, there was a time when rules were publicly posted. I went back to my own school, and we have these great old placards where you're sort of in the middle of the hall, this is what you're supposed to do. It was very clear. These are rules for teachers, and there are two that I liked. One was for men teachers. It says, men shall have 1 day a week for courting, or 2 days a week if they attend church regularly. And then we also had one rule for women, and it was women who marry or engage in unseemly conduct will be dismissed. And I love these rules. I love them because they're frighteningly clear, short-sighted, bigoted, and kind of crude, but frighteningly clear. And it's that clarity of rules that we are missing. Now, when the rules are posted and public, then we can get into the messy discussions that diversity really need. If diversity is just too happy and wonderful, we're probably not doing it right. Prep schools and colleges are some of the biggest perpetrators of this. If you look at the front of our view books, all right, if I think of all the college view books I see in the hallway, what I traditionally see is a black kid has a white kid in a headlock and he's giving him a noogie, and an Asian kid throws a frisbee to a Latin kid, and everybody is so frighteningly happy. And some of that is lovely. But sometimes what we present with those images and this constant promotion of diversity is that diversity is always lovely. And what our students can grow up thinking is, wow, this is easy, it's going to be great. And when they actually encounter diversity that's tough, and you have misunderstanding, and you have arguments because people are different, they might think that I'm doing it wrong. And when they think they're doing it wrong, they might give up before they've reached a real understanding of what that word is. So what we want to continue to try to promote are, as much as we can, share the rules of engagement and allow each person to identify themselves so that we can have a public dialogue. There's another set of rules as well. In 1840s, we had some of the first Chinese students in the country. Later, I believe in the 1880s, the school has gone through a series of names. We were Wesleyan Academy, which is a precursor to Wesleyan University. We invited a new, bizarre cultural demographic into the school, girls. And this was a complete series of new rules for many people there. We went so far as to hire a woman whose name was Charlotte Tillinghast, and her title was preceptress, which is just a wonderful title. And her job was to be, quote, a guardian of moral virtue. And what I imagine that was explaining new rules to new players who were supposed to be paying attention to algebra, but were now a lot more interested in this new demographic that had arrived on campus. Now, rules are great, and interest in others is great, but there's a key part here missing. And I'm addressing this to, the word I use will be majority. And I'm using the broad definition of the word. I'm a white male teacher. When I walk into a classroom, there's a certain amount of political power I have just by being who I am in the country I'm from. Now, what I'm often taught is learn about others, learn about others, learn about others, which is sound advice. But there needs to be a time when we are articulating and identifying our own culture, our own selves, and our biases, where we come from, where we think, what our values are. And if we are public with them, public with our students, about what type of person we are, then we're both engaged in a dialogue. It'll be a messy dialogue. But if we shape the rules around dialogue and shape the rules around here's how you have a productive argument, then our students and our teachers are moving forward. Now, I'll show this image for a minute. This is a little bizarre image and an awkward segue. But as student demographics have changed around the country, you see a broad variety of kids in high schools. But what you very rarely see are any substantive changes within the academic day. We're still teaching much the same things that we taught 100 years ago. What we found is that this continual push of student diversity has pushed us in other areas of the school where we've had to broaden our own academic diversity. About 10 years ago, we looked around and said there is a gap of knowledge that our young students have. They know next to nothing about economics, the world of business, and financial markets. And these are forces that are going to have a massive impact upon their lives. We also saw that about 80% of our graduates were probably going to work in private industry at some point or the other. So for us, it made sense. If we espouse globalism, we need to teach them some of the rules to this new game. Because like it or not, these rules will affect them. So we created what we called the Center for Entrepreneurial and Global Studies. It went so far as in 2008, we built the stock trading floor on campus, the first one in a high school in the country. Now, this was 2008, so the world was falling apart. And if you were involved in financial services or trading stocks, you were not a hero in the world at that time. So it was an awkward start. But what we did find is that as parents and students visited our school, they realized as they looked at their dwindling 401ks that those are forces that, like it or not, they're going to have an impact on their lives. They wanted their children to have a better understanding of those rules. And that's an experiment that we are still on. And like any experiment, the verdict is still out. There have been successes, there have been failures, there have been bump starts along the way. Also, those of you who've worked in school before know that old adage, it's true, that it's easier to change history than it is to change a history class. This is not without a lot of infighting. We're traditionalists, battle progressives within a school, and a lot of grumbles. But what we have done is create a culture where grumbling is becoming more and more accepted if it's done in a public forum. If you have the rules to how grumbling is supposed to happen, then you can move forward and have a messy, but eventually a productive dialogue. Now, academics, student diversity, those are two major parts of any institution, any part of a learning institution. But also, high school, kids are there to have fun, right? There's an element of games. And we wanted to make sure we were hitting all parts of the high school with our global message. So we also saw that with about a third of our student body from 30 some odd different countries, they came with very little knowledge of traditional American sports. And if you guys remember your high school careers, think back, sports, for the good or for bad, has a certain cachet in American high schools. It has value. What we wanted to do is get more and different people involved in athletics. We felt that that was important. So how do you do this? When I said at the beginning, I referred to myself as a teacher and a coach. And when I say coach, I'm not a job coach or a life coach. I'm a coach. I have cleats, I whistle, I sweat, I yell at kids. And at 3:30 in the spring, every afternoon, it's the best part of my day when I run out onto the rugby field. Now, we decided about 5 years ago to create a rugby team. We felt that this is a global game. This also puts people in a lot more equal position. It allows our American students to be learning. The other thing it did was it allowed a different group of students to emerge as leaders. Now, this might look quite bizarre if you're not familiar with the game. So our Japanese kid, our Thai kid, our Australian kid, all of them came knowing the rules ahead of the time. And so they quickly emerged as leaders, and we were able to build up around them. Now, if you don't know much about the game, it looks like a version of kill the guy with the ball, and there's an element of that that is still well and alive. I won't try to over-intellectualize the game. But what you see here is this is a game that you need to know the rules. And once you know the rules, then you're allowed to improvise. Unlike American football, it's not a coach-centered game where plays are sent in. At the highest level of the game, the players run the game, and the coach at international levels sits up in the stands and watches. You need to adapt. You need to improvise. So we had to learn new rules to a new game. And what we found is that after the Korean hooked it back and the Italian scrum half kicked it out to the Russian fly half, the Russian fly half was able to pass it on to the Japanese inside center to the Chinese outside center, who kicked it up the field where our American wing was able to score the ball, score a try. We thought, wow, that was great. And then we saw, man, we're scoring a bunch more. And then after a while, we were like, man, we're good. And that's for us when we started to really believe in this idea of diversity, that diversity for the sake of diversity is not a very admirable goal. We should not pat ourselves on the back simply because we mutually tolerate each other. What we're able to do is to be successful. And when heterogeneity breeds success, that's when you show that diversity works, and that's when you also can get followers to this message. So I won't say that these are our public rules. And I won't say that all of them work all the time. I also won't say that our students don't see race or ethnicity or class. They're still high school kids. And they're still going through all those awkward conversations that happen in high school. And just to leave in a happier image rather than a bunch of text. What we are doing is setting up infrastructure in these young people, that they're able to navigate new rules, they're able to teach their own rules, and through that, through the rule learning, and if we're able to continue to provide a loving and supportive environment to our students, they will be able to go out, learn new rules, and play. Thank you.